Hey folks, Vince the Evil DM back with another video for Savage Worlds SWADE Edition, Adventure Edition. Hopefully everybody's enjoying these videos I'm doing on this channel, trying to get people into the game. It's a way for me to relearn the game when I go into these games, when I do these videos, I should say. Gives me the ability to relearn and have maybe teach you something along the way. Some people have given me some great feedback on how this is helping them learn the game, and I appreciate that. So without further ado, I do appreciate you guys coming again. So let's just jump right into things so we don't have to worry about, beating around the bush here. So let's get to that book. All right, we got our Savage Worlds SWADE Edition book. We're going to go to page 87 today because we're going to be talking about, start talking about the rules and the terms of the rules that are in the game here. So there's a couple things you need to start before we get into things like combat and initiative and things like that. I just want to get the terms down correctly. So all players are considered wild cards, as you can see here. Unique NPCs and certain creatures that the GM will name are also considered wild cards. Everything else is considered an extra, which is basically fodder or minions in other games. Example would be of a GM using an NPC as a wild card would be like the big bad, or maybe a certain NPC that gives you information. In my games, maybe something like Rupert. Some people who play my games know he would definitely be a wild card. A zombie or a typical goblin, those would be considered extra. Now, you're probably saying, what is a wild card? What does that mean? Well, it means a few things. First things first, wild cards can take 3 wounds before they fall or get incapacitated. Extras only take 1 wound. Wild cards also roll an extra die when they are rolling trait rolls. They roll an extra d6 wild die. Extras don't do that. They only roll their normal trait die. When a wild card rolls their 2 dice together, which would be their trait die and their wild die, they roll and they take the higher of the 2. That's the bonus of being a wild card. Now you're asking, what's a trait roll? Basically, you're taking the dice listed under your stat or your trait, as I was saying, your attribute. Roll that die, and if you're a wild card, you add a d6. Rolling them together, and generally you're trying to beat a 4 or more. Remember, you don't add them together, they're separate. So you're rolling to a d10 here, like I have in my hand, and a d6. Let me get a better look here for you. A d10 and a d6, you roll them, and they come up, say, I don't know, a 9 on the d10 and a 4 on the d6. You would take the 9. That would be your number. The higher of the 2 is what you always take. The target number generally will be 4, but it can vary from situation to situation. There are situational modifiers that GM can assign to you, and also an edge or a hindrance can apply here as well. Now, another thing about the game is if you roll the highest number on your die during a trait roll or attribute roll, whichever you want to call it, it explodes. It's called aces. So if you roll your 2 dice together, again, the d10, the d6, and you happen to get a 10 on the 10 die, and you get a 6 on your better die. You get a 6, which was a roll d20 radio die. You roll a 6 on that, you would take the higher of the 2 and re-roll it again, adding it to your previous result. So the d10, I rolled again, and let's say I roll it again, I got a 2. So now I have a 12 as opposed to only having a 10. Now, if I rolled another 10, I would roll again, adding the results again and again. So if I got that a 10 again, and I rolled the 3rd time, this time I got a 1. Wow, that sucks, but my roll now is 21. So that gives me a giant roll, and I got a bunch of raises there, which I will go over in just a moment because you're probably wondering, what is a raise? So each raise will give you some type of bonus. How does that work? So say you have your target number of 4. We're going with our 21 before, and I said to you, okay, you got to beat a 4, and you're like, all right, boom, 21. I'm like, wow. So that means every 4 over your target number gives you a raise. So 8 12, 16, and 20. That's 4 raises you got there because the 1 doesn't count as anything. But what does that give you? It gives you more successes on a skill check because when you're checking, maybe you want to build something or you want to repair something, the more successes, the better it's repaired. Giving you more damage when you're dealing out, though you can only get 1 raise on the damage, so regardless of how much more you do. So it also helps you prevent wounds. We'll get more into that when we get on the combat section, but you can use your raises when you're doing a soak roll, and if you get a raise on that, that's 1 less wound that you'll have to take. So when you're soaking, which we'll get into in combat, that means you're trying to absorb the wounds or shrug them off. And let's say you qualify and get one of them taken off, but you had that 20, you would not only take 1 off, you would take 2 off, but 3 off. But all depends on the situation. Again, we'll go over that during the combat section. Now, there's one thing that you're probably wondering, what about crit fails? Maybe you're not wondering about that. Didn't think it was possible. Yeah, it is. It's bound to happen, and it will happen to everybody, even the GM. Crit fail is you roll all 1s on your die, regardless. If you're an extra or wild card. So if you got your 2 dice again, and you're rolling it, and they come up snake eyes, crit fail, that's the end of it. You failed. Something bad happens, and the GM will tell you that information, like something broke, or maybe you tripped and fell, or you hit a companion, or something like that. It happens. It's just the game and how it rolls. Unskilled attempts. The one thing good about Savage Worlds is that you can attempt just about anything in the game within reason, and you can pretty much supply an argument to your GM about a reason why you can attempt something that is a skill check. So you don't necessarily have to have the skill in the actual skill itself, I should say, to... Let me get to the reroll here section for you. So basically for it, if a character doesn't have a skill for an action he's attempting, he rolls a d4 for his skill die and a wild die if he's a wild card, which is a player, and subtract 2 from the total. That's it. But the GM may decide that you can't do it. Like with something like brain surgery. Can you do brain surgery? I know I can't. Do I have an argument for brain surgery? No. Could I argue with the GM about maybe my character is a dentist and he's steady with tools and he knows how to use machines and everything, and maybe he could figure it out. Stretch? Maybe? I don't know. It's up to the GM, his decision. So let's talk a little bit about bennies. I've mentioned it a couple times in the videos previously about bennies. And they are basically your lifesavers in the game. The game changers, they can influence how things happen in the game. You start each session with 3 bennies only. And if you don't use them, you lose them. There's nothing like carrying them over or anything. I mean, I've seen house rules where a GM will say, sure, let's carry them over, or yeah, carry over 1. It's really, but per the rules in the book, you get 3, use them or not. You can gain more, as the GM will award you various bennies during the game for things like, pulling something off amazing, or a funny moment, or just playing your character correctly. Even playing a hindrance out to its maximum will gain you a benny. Anything like that will gain you a benny. It's the GM's discretion. Generally, GMs can throw it out like candy. Some GMs will not. It's really up to the GM. Now, how about using it? So how do we use those bennies? Oh, and a GM does get bennies as well. It's not really that important for this video, but a GM will get 1 for each PC for his PC pool. He'll get 2 for each wild card character he has in his arsenal. So he has a pool of his own bennies that he can use as well. And generally, I've seen a lot of GMs really don't keep track, and they say they do, but they really don't. But it's really up to you as a GM how you want to handle it. Now, using bennies, running with how you use a benny. Well, you can use it, 1, to re-roll a trait, but not on critical failures. When you get a critical failure, like we described before, something bad happens. That ends everything. The rolls are over. There's no chance for anything done. That's the price you pay for crit fail. You can use it for recovering from a shaken status. Remember when I told you take wounds before? When we get into the combat section, when you get hit, Generally, there's a shaken and then there's a wound status. You can, in a shaken status, you can't really do that much and you're kind of, stunned. So you can remove the shaken status by spending a Benny. Doesn't matter if it's on your turn or not. It could be not on your turn. It could be in the middle of combat and you just got hit and now the GM's moving around to the next move. You can just say, here's a Benny. I want to get rid of that status. Gone. You don't have to wait for your turn for that to happen. Like I said before, you can use them to soak wounds. So every time you want to soak wounds, you can spend a Benny to do that, which we'll get into later when we talk about combat. You can also use it during your initiative. During initiative, generally, when we play the game, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody use anything other than cards. Down here. You use a deck of cards, much like these, but these are my special D&D type ones. Each player is dealt a card by the GM, and then they reveal the cards, and then they go in order of initiative based on the card that you have. You could spend a Benny if you don't like the card that you were drawn. So let's say you were drawn a 2, and you're like, that sucks. Here's a Benny. I want another card. GM will go, okay, now you have a 3. Can't take the better of the 2, unfortunately. I mean, you could probably house rule that, right? I don't know. It's up to you. It's your game, right? You can also use a Benny to re-roll damage. So if you're rolling your damage and you don't feel you got high enough, roll it again. Take the higher the 2 results. If you don't, you don't get punished if you re-roll and get lower. You just take the higher the 2 results. There's also one last thing that you can use a Benny for, and a lot of GMs kind of use it, don't use it. I don't know if I would use it or not, but it influenced the story. You can spend a Benny to get a hint, get a certain item when you need it during the game type of thing. You could use it to influence the story, make an NPC like you a little bit more during a certain situation, get maybe an advantage somewhat. It's really up to the GM how they want to play out the bennies like that, because it can break things and make the players a little too powerful if you let them get too far with it. But I would see, throwing out a Benny if a GM said, well, if you want to spend a Benny, you could get this. Or if the player says, hey, I don't think we have an idea what's going on. What if I spend a Benny? Can we find a clue to help us where to go? I see that as reasonable and not a big deal. So that's how some of the terms are before we get into combat. I wanted to go over these, call this part 1 of rules, terms and stuff, I think I'll call it. But I wanted to go over these things rather quickly in 15 minutes or less and get this out here before we go into combat and get everybody confused on terms, because I need to get on a little virtual tabletop and go over some combat and how everything moves and goes around, because it's a little bit different than probably most people are used to. So with that said, I'm going to say keep it original, keep it old school. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Good night, everybody.